sir. We appreciate if you didn't play Blackjack anymore, okay? All right.
So we are going to be trespassing you, so I suggest that you catch anything out that you have with you.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of my life as an advantaged Blackjack player. Once again, we're back in Las Vegas and I've got a ton of action for you today. In my last video, I played at Palace Station, Gold Coast, and the Strat. We got off to a bit of a rocky start, losing $2,300 at Palace Station, but I was able to turn it around at the next two spots and finish the day with a profit of $4,500. I was hoping to keep that momentum going in today's sessions. As most of you probably know, I'm playing Blackjack and using the high-low counting system to bet higher when I have an advantage over the house. I made a video explaining how the system works. It's linked in the description and you guys can check it out if you want. As I stated in my last video, these sessions took place at the end of my Vegas trip. This means my name had been circulating around the Vegas properties and casinos I'd already visited had been warning others that I may pay them a visit as well. Which is honestly hilarious. These casinos that pull massive profits year after year will go out of their way to warn their direct competition that a card counter may come by and generate a couple $1,000s of EV. How scary. With my name being hot and my picture floating around at the different casinos, I wasn't expecting to get much time. The first location I decided to hit in this video was the famous Caesars Palace. There's a couple of decent games they offer here, but I was specifically targeting the main floor 6 deck. I made my way in there, found my table, and began playing. The minimum bet was $50, so I started playing that until I got into a positive count.
How you doing, sir?
Good, you?
Good. My name's I'm the casino manager. We're going to finish this time. We're going to cash you out. We no longer want your business.
That was split up. At least we get to have some fun on the last one.
There you go.
One more 10. Look at that.
Mark. Mark.
Thank you. Have a good night.
So we are going to be trespassing you, so I suggest that you catch anything out that you have with you.
This casino?
Yeah.
675.
You have an ID with you, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, 150 ID.
So you'll be trespassed from anything that Caesars owns. Any other company, obviously, we have no control over. Excellent. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, below, let's throw you out. Thank you.
Do you have a room here at Caesar Palace?
Pardon me?
Do you have a room here at Caesar Palace? Okay. I'm going to ask you to depart property. Just so you know, per management, they're asking you to trespass and just ask you not to come back.
Yeah.
I am to ask you for your passport. You do not have to give it to me.
Verbal trespass.
That's no problem with me. If you'll please depart the front door.
Well, as you can see, that didn't last very long. I had to show ID when I sat down so they immediately knew who I was, and before I even got to raise my bets, I was asked to leave. I had never played here before, so obviously they don't take well to people who have the ability to beat their games. I played a whopping 8 minutes, my hourly EV was $478, and I left with a profit of $225. Since Caesars was a no-go, I was on my way to Aria. This is another massive strip property, and it was the evening, so I was hoping to not have immediate attention on me. At the very least, I'd like to play some positive counts. Again, I was targeting their main floor 6 deck. There's a couple 3-2 tables hidden among the floor, so that's where I was headed. As always, make sure you guys are never playing the 6-5 tables. They're a scam and are just a way for the casino to increase their house edge and get even more money out of you. After finding the right table, I bought in and started playing minimum bets at $50 a hand. After a while, the count hit a true 1, so I raised my bet to $100. This is my bet spread that I'll be using. I start with $100 at a true 1 and work all the way up to either 2 hands of $1,200 or 1 hand of $2,000 depending on if I'm playing solo or not. On my $100 bet, I was dealt a soft 13 versus dealer's 10. I hit it all the way into a 17 and stood. Dealer ended up busting, so this first hand was a win. The true count was now bordering between a true 1 and 2, and I decided to settle on a single hand of $150. I was dealt a soft 18 versus dealer's 9. I had to hit and sadly ended up drawing to a bust, so this one was no good. I was now back down to my $100 bet. I put it out there and was dealt an 11 versus dealer's 10. I tried to put out my $100 to double it, but it was no use as the dealer had Blackjack. I tried again and was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 10. I hit, turning it into a 16, which I stood on. As an advantage player, I play perfect basic strategy, but will sometimes deviate from it depending on the count. 16 stands versus 10 in any positive count, so that's why I did that. Dealer had 18, so this hand was our third loss in a row. The count had dipped below 1, so I was back to minimum bets. I played through the negatives for a little bit until the count recovered back to a true 2, which had me raising my bet to 2 hands of $200. I was dealt a 13 and a 12 versus dealer's 2. I stood on both, again deviating from basic strategy for the 12, which would normally be a hit. Dealer ended up busting, so both these hands were paid out. Nice. I left the same bets out again and was dealt an 18 and a 16 versus dealer's 10. This game offered surrender, so I stood my 18 and surrendered my 16. Dealer had a 10 underneath, so sadly my 18 didn't pay. True count had dropped to 1, so I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt a 19 versus dealer's 8. Of course I stood and the dealer drew to 21, so this one also lost. The count went negative for 1 hand before recovering to a true 4, bordering on a true 5. I had to buy in because I was raising my bet to 2 hands of $600. I was dealt a 10 and a 19 versus dealer's 5. This means I was pulling out even more cash to double my 10. Obviously I stood the 19 and the dealer ended up busting, meaning this massive $1,800 hand was paid out.
Yeah, I'll head out. One more blackjack. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, at least I got to spread and win a couple big bets. I didn't get much time here at Aria, which isn't ideal, but I was walking away with a profit, so I can't complain. I played for 18 minutes, my hourly EV was $535, and I won $1,475. With no time to waste, I headed to one of their sister properties, Mandalay Bay. They have a good double deck game here, but it's in the high limit room and they watch it like a hawk. They also require ID to play it, so I knew I wasn't going to get any time there. I settled for their main floor 8 deck game, which is worth a lot less, but at least I actually had a chance to play it. I got in there and started playing, but after a little bit the table completely filled up, bringing the rounds per hour down to abysmal levels. This, combined with a new dealer who was giving very poor deck penetration, led me to just skip Mandalay Bay altogether. There were no positive counts while I played, so nothing worth showing. I played here for 20 minutes, hourly EV at the time of playing was $457, and I left with a loss of $90. On to the next. I now had my sights set on the Cosmopolitan. This was the 3rd MGM property I was hitting in a row, so again, I wasn't expecting to get much time. All it takes for me to get the boot is the surveillance staff doing their job properly. Cosmo has an almost identical 8-deck game as the Mandalay, and that's where I was headed. I got in there and got to work. This session was pretty uneventful, and I played negative counts for quite a while. Eventually we hit a true 2, so I raised my bet to 2 hands of $200. I was dealt a 7 and a 14 versus dealer's 10. I turned the 7 into a 17 and busted the 14, so we weren't off to a great start. Dealer had a 10 underneath, so my 17 was no good either. I tried again with another 2 hands of 200 and was dealt an 18 and a 13. Once again dealer had a 10, so I wasn't in good shape. I stood the 18 and turned the 13 into the classic 23 as per usual. Dealer ended up drawing to 18, so at least I pushed my first hand. That was the last hand of the shoe, so I was back to grinding through the negatives. Near the end of the next shoe, the count finally got back to a true 1. I raised my bet to $100 and was dealt an 11 versus dealer's 10. I doubled, the dealer drew to 17, and luckily I had enough to beat her. I left my bet out and was dealt a soft 16 versus dealer's 6. Once again I doubled and the dealer drew to a bust, so this one was paid as well. Once again we were at the end of the shoe, so the grind continued. About halfway into the next one, true count got back up to 1. I put out my $100 and was dealt a 20 versus dealer's 5. Dealer drew to 17, so this one was paid. I left my bet out and was dealt another 20 versus dealer's 5, with the same result. My next hand was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 3. Now we had some work to do. Amazingly, I pulled a 7 for 19 and the dealer drew to a bust, so I was laughing. For my last hand at true 1, I was dealt a soft 16 versus 2, which I promptly turned into a 22 and lost. After this, I was back into the negatives for a few hands until the count recovered to a true 3. I raised my bet to 2 hands of 300 and was dealt a 14 and a 15 versus dealer's 10. I turned my 14 into a 19 and surrendered the 15. Dealer had a 10 underneath, so there goes my 19. I lowered my bet to 2 hands of $200 and was dealt a soft 17 and a 20 versus dealer's 10. I turned my 17 into a 23 and stood my 20. Of course the dealer had a 10 underneath, so my second hand of 20 went to waste. True count was now back to 1, so I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 4, which I stood on. Dealer drew to 18 and you know the rest. I threw out another hand of $100 and was dealt a 15 versus 2. I stood and with great skill the dealer drew to 19, meaning another loss. I was officially out of chips, so I pulled out some cash with hopes to keep playing.
Sure. We appreciate if you didn't play blackjack anymore, okay?
Finally, the back off came. I lasted longer here than expected, but that's most likely because I didn't experience many positive counts. The big bets is what tends to get attention, and I didn't have many of those. All in all, I lasted 1 hour and 28 minutes. My hourly EV was $206, and I left with a loss of $700. Not the intended result, but what can you do? I decided to give MGM a break and headed for my new spot, Flamingo. This was another Caesars property, and after my trespass at Caesars Palace, they definitely knew I was in the area. So once again, I didn't have my hopes up for a long session. Going into Flamingo after just being in the Cosmo was quite the downgrade in aesthetics. However, none of that matters when they have double deck with good conditions. I decided to play the high limit room, which was completely empty. This was great for me because I could play very quickly and maximize my EV for the short time that I'd be there. I bought in and got down to business. I started playing my minimum bet of $50 until the last hand of the first shoe, where the true count got up to somewhere between 1 and 2. I raised my bet to $150 and was dealt an 8 versus dealer's 7. I hit it into a 17 and stood. Dealer matched me and we pushed. You guys will notice that this is a pitched blackjack game where the dealer tosses the cards to me face down. I've had a few of you ask for the reasoning behind this, and it's hard to say exactly. It's an old school way of playing it, and some players prefer to handle the cards. I've also heard that some casinos believe it to be a deterrent for card counters. In recent times, most casinos have moved away from it because it slows the game down, which means less profit for them. Either way, it's still beatable. You just need to pay a bit more attention, especially when there's multiple players at the table. I played several hands at minimum bet in the next shoe until the count jumped up to a true 3. I raised my bet to $400 and was dealt a 14 versus dealer's 10. I hit and got a 5 for 19. We got lucky here because the dealer had a 6 underneath followed by a 10, meaning we were getting paid. I left my same bet out and was dealt a 15 versus 10. Sadly, there wasn't another 5 waiting for me here and I busted out. Count dropped to a true 1 and I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt the exact same hand, and ironically now is when I pulled the 6 for 21. Dealer had a 9 underneath, so this one was paid. At this point, phone calls were being made and I knew my time here was limited. The count can fluctuate like crazy on these double deck games, so there was still hope to get some big bets out in the next few minutes. For the last hand in the shoe, I had another hand of $100 out. I was dealt a 19 versus dealer 7, which I stood on. Dealer ended up drawing to 20, so this one was no good. We got into a new shoe and it took only one hand for us to get to a true 1. I raised my bet and was dealt a 14 versus dealer's ace. There was no way to improve this one because dealer had blackjack. After this, I played a couple hands at minimum bet before the count recovered to a true 2. I raised my bet to $200 and was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 7. I hit it all the way into a 25, so this one was a bust. I tried again and was dealt an 18 versus dealer's ace. I stood with no insurance. The dealer didn't have it and ended up drawing to a 22, so this one was paid out. There goes all my blackjacks though. After this, I played a couple hands at minimum bet until the count returned to the positives, this time hitting a true 4. I raised my bet to $600 and was dealt a 13 versus dealer's 10. You guys know this is my least favorite hand, but somehow we pulled an 8 for 21. I'll gladly take that. Dealer had the 10 underneath, but it wasn't enough. I left my $600 bet out and was dealt a 15 versus dealer's 2. Not ideal, but at least I didn't have to hit. 2s don't always treat me right, but this time the dealer ended up drawing to a bust. That was the last hand of the shoe, and it was nice to finish up with a couple lucky hands like that. We got into a new one, and before long I was back to a true 1. I put my $100 out and was dealt a 13 versus dealer's 7. This time the 10 magnet did as expected and I busted. Another hand of $100 and I was dealt a 17 versus dealer's 8. Obviously I stood and the dealer also drew to 17, so this one was a push. The count was now somewhere between a true 1 and 2, so I raised my bet to $150. I was dealt a 14 versus ace, which I promptly turned into a 24 and lost. Count was now back up to a true 2, so out went the $200 bet. I was dealt a 13 versus 5, which I happily tucked. Things didn't work out my way though because the dealer drew to 18. True count was now 3 and I raised my bet to $400. I was dealt a pair of 2s versus dealer's 10. With great skill and ability, I managed to turn this one into a 21, so we were in good shape. Dealer ended up busting, so it didn't even matter. This is where things start to really ramp up. True count had hit 5, which means I was raising my bet to $1,200. This couldn't have gone any better because I was dealt a blackjack. What a treat. I was paid out $1,800 on this one. True count was staying strong at 5, so I tried my luck again. I was dealt a 14 versus 6, which I figured would also result in a win. Sadly, the dealer had other plans and managed to draw to 19. I wasn't giving up because the true count was now 6. I upped my bet to $1,500 and crossed my fingers. Once again, things couldn't have gone better and I was dealt another blackjack. Let's go. I love it when they make it easy for me. This one was paid out $2,250. The count had dropped slightly to a true 5, so I lowered my bet back to $1,200. It looks like my luck hadn't run out yet because I was dealt another blackjack. This is like a card counter's dream. I would have loved to keep this going, but I had gotten the tap from a suited individual who had been standing behind me for this last hand. Sadly, it was time to color up and leave.
Thanks a lot, man. Have a good night.
You really gotta talk.
Yeah. Okay,
Do you have idea you?
I do. I'll just show it all at the cage. We're going to
Sorry?
cash out. Like, we're going to cash out. I'll just show it all at the cage.
Okay. Alright. Well, your business is no longer going to be welcome in this casino. The gentleman here is going to reach you the trespass.
Yeah.
And make sure you come back. If you come back, you're going to be arrested.
I won't. I won't.
Okay.
What's up to you to immediately arrest for trespass?
What's the day of birth?
Some of you may have already seen that interaction because I posted it a while back as a reel. Now you know how the whole situation developed. Obviously Caesars as a company is sweaty as fuck and immediately trespass anyone who has the slightest chance to actually win some money. This policy that they have against players like me makes it even more satisfying to take a win like we did today. I played for 16 minutes at an hourly EV of $597. In that short time, I was able to amass $5,900 of profits. This is a new session record for the channel, and I was leaving Flamingo feeling alright. Of course, it hurts to get trespassed, but as I've said before, they expire after a couple years. As for the daily totals, in this video I played for 2 hours and 20 minutes and managed to pull in a profit of $6,810. Not a bad hourly wage, all things considered. Of course, I performed way above EV in this video and could have easily lost this much in the same amount of time, but it's nice to see things swing my way. That's all I got for you guys today. My next video will be the highly anticipated Bellagio session, which I know you guys will enjoy. Don't be afraid to leave some feedback in the comments. I try to read every one of them. I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.